Hello, Laura. I hope this finds you well. I'll be posting this video on the YouTube comedy channel of my website, laughingatfeminists.com, a website dedicated to the truism that feminists are laughable, ridiculous, and ludicrous. You're all these things and more, of course, but you're also what Herbert Purdy, the author of Their Angry Creed, once described you as: a child woman. One of the reasons you're a child woman is your embracing of feminism, which invariably has an infantilizing effect on women and girls because it absolves them from the need to have or to develop moral agency and resilience. I imagine you must live in a permanent state of anxiety brought on by the lies and myths you've embraced and done so much to perpetuate. Your latest book, published last month, is titled Men Who Hate Women, and it's subtitled From Incels to Pickup Artists, The Truth About Extreme Misogyny and How It Affects Us All. You name and write about a number of MRAs in the book, including Paul Elam and myself, so you clearly see us as extreme misogynists. In this video, I'll be exercising my right to reply to your lies and misrepresentations about me and the political party I used to lead, Justice for Men and Boys, and the women who love them. The image next to me is of Elizabeth Hobson reading your book. I think she's creatively improved the front cover, and the modified title makes far more sense than the original one. She recently posted a video challenging you to a debate and is still awaiting your response. Another of her videos explores your laughable claim, related over pages 136 to 140 in your book, to have attended and sat through the Messages for Men conference in London in 2018, which Elizabeth co-hosted as well as introducing the speakers. You failed to mention her name in the book, referring to her dismissively as a young woman. Near the end of your account of the conference you didn't attend, you write this: the conference was small and its attendees' arguments weak. Both claims are absurd. There's plenty of video footage of the audience at the event, and none of it, to the best of my knowledge, shows you attending the event. Frankly, you would have been as conspicuous at a British Men's Issues conference as a Nazi officer in full military uniform in a Berlin synagogue in the 1930s. The excellent Glass Blind Spot YouTube channel includes a number of videos relating to your book, and the interviewees include Paul Elam and Erin Pitsey. Laura, there probably hasn't been a feminist I've written and spoken about more than you. You're a miserable, whiny, lying, narcissistic, toxic harpy, all of which is, of course, implied by the word feminist. Piers Morgan captured you perfectly on his TV program almost 2 years ago when he said to you, "Lovely to see you, Laura. You can laugh. Come on, have a laugh." Of course you didn't. In 2012, at the tender age of 26, having achieved nothing of note with your life, you set up the Everyday Sexism Project. You've continued doing nothing of note from that day to this, other than perfecting the art of making money from already unhappy women and girls, some of them with pre-existing anxiety disorders and other mental health issues. A year later, in 2013, I launched the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them, J4MB. Your project had received extensive media coverage over the preceding year, including on BBC television and radio. It wasn't long before we started referring to you in our blog pieces as Special Snowflake and your project as the Everyday Whining Project. I led J4MB until I handed the position over to Elizabeth Hobson, previously the party's Director of Communications, 5 months ago. Now that was an odd thing for an extreme misogynist to do, you might agree, Laura. If you'd researched my work properly, you'd know that I've always been a huge supporter of female MRAs, including Karen Strawn, Girl Writes What, Professor Janice Fiamengo, Elizabeth Hobson, Bettina Arndt, Ava Brighton, and Natty Raymond, along with many others. At the two international conferences on men's issues I hosted in 2016 and 2018, the keynote speakers were respectively Erin Pitsey and Karen Strawn. Within a fortnight of the party's launch in 2013, you joined me on the Jeremy Vine Show on BBC Radio 2, a programme broadcast live to over 7 million people. The file of the discussion is on the J4MB YouTube channel. You entered the studio only a minute or two before we went on air, and we had no chance to converse before the segment started. At one point during the discussion, I could see what Jeremy Vine couldn't see because of the studio layout, that you are reading from a document in front of you. At 5 minutes and 15 seconds into the programme, after you'd been droning on for some time, he asked you, "Are you reading all that out? Where's this coming from?" To which you replied, "No, this is coming from me." Well, Laura, I wish I'd had the presence of mind to inform Jeremy Vine and his 7 million listeners that you'd lied and had been reading it out. It was an early taste of your fondness for lying, a direct result of your lack of moral agency, a defining trait of all feminists, of course. After the discussion was over and we were off air, you angrily demanded I stop sending you threatening emails. I told you the emails I'd sent over the preceding days were linked to information about J4MB and its policies, and none of the emails had been threatening. You had a face like thunder, angrily stamped your foot like an angry child, and stormed out of the studio. Jeremy Vine's face was a picture, and all he could think of to say was, "Wow." Then we both burst out laughing. That was my first and so far only meeting with you, and my only appearance on the Jeremy Vine Show. You have over the years had enormous mainstream media exposure, particularly from left-wing media organisations such as the BBC, the deeply corrupt state broadcaster, and The Guardian. Viewers of this video won't be surprised to learn that you're a columnist for The Guardian. Some months after setting up J4MB, I launched the Wine Club. That's wine with an H, and you were the inaugural member. I also set up the Lying Feminist of the Month Awards, which you won twice, along with 2 Whiny Feminist of the Month Awards. Only Caroline Criado Perez has won more Lying Feminist of the Month Awards, 3 of them. I was on a daytime chat show with her, in the course of which she was asked by Philip Schofield what she'd done to deserve a Laughing Feminist of the Month award. She laughed, did a jazz hands thing, and said, I lied. Schofield was lost for words, sadly. The video file is on the J4MB YouTube channel. How might I best describe you, Laura, other than a child woman, to people who aren't aware of you? You're a prime example of what Dr. Warren Farrell, who you criticize in your new book, would term a victim feminist. You've made a career out of whining, which is why we refer to you as a professional wine merchant. Again, wine with an H. You seem to have dedicated your life to making younger women and girls in particular see themselves as victims of men's and boys' actions and inactions, discouraging them from developing moral agency and thereby becoming more resilient and happier with their lives and options. Miserable women, a group which by definition includes all feminists, are drawn to the everyday whining project like moths to a flame. As I've said many times, feminists are the only group of people in the world who actively seek to raise women's anxiety, in part because there's money to be made in doing so, as you and countless other feminists prove. You've written 5 books, all of them published by Simon & Schuster, one of the largest publishers in the world. The rest of this video relates to your latest book. I was alerted to it by a number of people who told me there was material on J4MB and myself in it. And so there is, in 6 sections, which I'll read out and sometimes comment on. One curious omission from the book is an index, and I can only speculate as to the reason or reasons for that. Maybe you or the publisher didn't want to make it easy for people who might have legitimate grievances about the content relating to them to easily find that content. Individuals misrepresented in your book, in addition to myself, include Paul Elam and Philip Davis MP. For the sake of brevity, I'll comment only on the sections mainly about J4MB and myself. Inspired by Elizabeth Hobson's improvement of the front cover, I hope you'll agree I've improved the back cover. I'll start on page 126. Now, I don't ordinarily write on book pages or cut out pages from books, but frankly, I consider this book to be 180 sheets of overpriced toilet paper. And if I ever run out of regular toilet paper, that's the use I'm going to make of it. You write this. One notorious MRA, thank you, Laura, for that, has targeted me so intensely and obsessively over a period of years that, as a Guardian journalist wrote, his behavior might easily be mistaken for stalking. Well, it might be mistaken for stalking by a blithering idiot, which I guess includes journalists working at the Guardian, including yourself. His website currently hosts 164 individual articles about me, typically with titles like, "Will someone change Laura Bates's diaper?" Calling me fucking pathetic and stupid. A number of things here. Firstly, Laura, thank you for leading people to the J4MB website. Anyone who Googles, "Will someone change Laura Bates's diaper?" will go straight to the J4MB website, as well as the website of the Alternative Sexism Project, a project I worked on some years ago, but haven't for some time. Now, if there's one thing that all British MRAs would agree on, it's that you are fucking pathetic and stupid. But I thought it unlikely I'd have employed the first term on the J4MB blog, so I did a keyword search. The term appears in the title of a blog piece I posted in 2016, and asterisks are used in place of the letters U, C, and K. What you decline to reveal, Laura, is that the full title of the piece is Janet Bloomfield, why are feminist women, e.g. Laura Bates, so fucking pathetic? My piece consisted of a link to Janet's article, sadly no longer available, and this text. There can be few women on the planet as well qualified as Janet to comment on Special Snowflake's relentless wittering. Janet's talk at the London conference will be titled, "How Feminism Infantilizes Women." That's the end of my blog piece. Janet's talk was amazing as it happens, and I had the unenviable task of following it. You can find it, Laura, on the J4MB YouTube channel. Enjoy. You write this. He writes again and again about my partner and private life, saying he would gnaw off both feet without the benefit of anesthetic to avoid the grim fate of marrying me, which makes it seem rather odd that he voluntarily devotes so much of his time and energy to keeping up with my romantic choices. Laura, I have devoted almost no time and energy keeping up with your romantic choices. I can only assume that your belief that I have devoted a lot of time to them stems from your narcissism. The MRM also goes some way towards attempting to rehabilitate its image from extreme and violent misogyny by copiously leveraging for propaganda a small but extremely vocal group of women who pride themselves on their rejection of feminist ideas. Laura, the MRM does not have an image of extreme and violent misogyny. This is an absurd example of argument by assertion. If it had such an image, there wouldn't be so many wonderful female MRAs. You are maliciously conflating the MRM, and by extension MRAs like myself, with men who are extreme violent misogynists, including some mass killers who you write about at length earlier in the book. The biggest group, who call themselves honey badgers, received wild acclaim online from MRAs, with members like Canadian Karen Strawn attracting millions of views for her YouTube videos, and others like Janet Bloomfield, writing highly popular blogs dismissing female victims of sexual violence and lambasting women for single motherhood. Well, Laura, it's good to see you mention Karen Strawn, Girl Writes What, and Janet Bloomfield, Judgy Bitch, there. Although Janet sadly hasn't been actively blogging for years, following online threats made against her children. It's a shame that other prominent female MRAs and anti-feminists didn't get a mention. But even you, Laura, cannot be so stupid as to believe that female MRAs dismiss female victims of sexual violence. They challenge women who make false accusations of sexual violence, where the victims are the falsely accused men. An example being a number of pieces by Janet Bloomfield. Back to your book and pages 134 to 136. Like other elements of the manosphere, the MRM occupies startlingly large online spaces, but it also occupies more real-world space than many other misogynistic web communities, thanks to the presence of pressure groups, political parties, and campaign organizations, which hold meetings, protests, and conferences, and engage more directly with the mainstream media and political structures than groups like incels do. The penetration of the online hatred into everyday society is also facilitated by political activity. A prime example is Justice for Men and Boys, and the women who love them, a British political party that registered with the Electoral Commission in February 2013. Laura, where's your evidence that J4MB is a prime example of facilitating the penetration of online hatred into everyday society? You have no evidence because it doesn't exist. By its very nature, the reincarnation of this particular MRA community as an official political party has enabled the group, which formerly called itself the Anti-Feminism League, and now goes by the acronym J4MB, to achieve a significant sweep of media coverage. Laura, your claim of a significant sweep of media coverage is a ridiculous exaggeration, and you know it. From The Telegraph to BuzzFeed to The Observer, articles included quotes from the party's leader, Mike Buchanan, such as, "We hear a lot about misogyny, which is actually very rare, but a hatred of men is very commonplace. As far as the state is concerned, males are pretty much subhuman, and they'll do anything they can do to destroy men's lives." In his new status as a politician, Buchanan was also given free rein to opine unchallenged about the myth of the glass ceiling, stating, "Women just want to do other things with their lives. They're less driven and have less to gain from getting to the top of their professions, so they naturally don't put the effort in that a man would." End of quotation. Although much of the coverage was critical, the very fact that such quotes appeared in the national press in the context of a political leader running for office helps to provide MRA ideology with a sense of legitimacy and acceptability, while also serving as a gateway for potentially susceptible converts who might go on to access some of the movement's more extreme online spaces as a result. Laura, your suggestion that J4MB might lead some to access some of the movement's more extreme online spaces is pure hyperbole. In fact, it's an example of something that makes up so much of this book, hyperbolics. The MRM of which I'm a part has no such spaces. Again, this is just malicious conflation. The impact can be subtle. One newspaper article, for example, described Buchanan as the author of 3 books, lending him an air of academic credibility, but failed to mention the fact that said books had been self-published, one of them being an anti-feminist tome featuring a picture of a snarling vampire woman with bloodshot eyes on the front cover, which, at the time of writing, sits at number 602,916 in the Amazon charts. Well, Laura, where to start? You're implying that your books, published by a major publisher, give them an air of academic credibility, when you must surely be aware that outside of your feminist bubble, your books are considered to be stinking piles of bullshit. Major publishers aren't prepared to publish books that are highly critical of feminism and feminists, and a best-selling author published by Simon & Schuster told me about the feminist editor he was forced to deal with there. The refusal of major commercial publishers to publish MRA's books was one of the reasons I launched LPS Publishing over 10 years ago. As far as I know, it's the only publisher in the world actively seeking book proposals from MRAs and other anti-feminists. The MRAs and other anti-feminists whose books I've published include William Collins, Herbert Purdy, Swano Pye, and Terence Popp, redonkulous. And I've published 10 of my own books. The party's YouTube channel, which it uses to record its members' radio and television appearances, features a large number of videos, including interviews with BBC Radio Kent, BBC Radio Scotland, LBC, Vanessa Feltz, Talk Radio, BBC Three Counties Radio, BBC Radio Nottingham, BBC Radio Leicester, BBC Radio Bristol, BBC Radio Ulster, ITV's This Morning, the BBC's Sunday Morning Live, the Victoria Derbyshire Show, Sky News, the BBC's flagship Daily Politics and Sunday Politics programmes, and even Turkish television, among many others. This is an enormous amount of mainstream media exposure and airtime for a party whose 2 parliamentary candidates would garner a grand total of 216 votes between them in the May 2015 general election. Laura, you're so full of crap. J4MB has had little mainstream media exposure and airtime, not an enormous amount. On many of the programs you name, I've appeared only once or twice in the past 7 years. Quite a number are local radio stations, some with very small audiences. You've personally had far more mainstream media coverage than all the world's MRAs collectively over the past half-century, long before you were born. And you're arguing in your book for MRAs to get even less mainstream media exposure. I'm sure you'd be happy if we got 0 media exposure. Laura, you should be utterly ashamed of yourself. A party whose website continues to promote articles such as 13 Reasons Women Lie About Being Raped. Yes, a very good article by Janet Bloomfield. You should read it, Laura. And 10 Reasons False Rape Allegations Are Common. A very good article by Jonathan Taylor. A party whose election manifesto called for scrapping many of the elements of the 2010 Equality Act and suggested that women are as physically aggressive as men, if not more so, in intimate relationships. Well, Laura, it's a very well-established fact that women are as physically aggressive as men, if not more so, in intimate relationships. Indeed, in straight couples, where the violence is always in one direction, the perpetrator is twice as likely to be the woman as the man. I recommend you check out William Collins's The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect, and the academic literature reviews of Professor Martin Fiebert and the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Project, PASK. But of course I know you won't. You're far too committed to the lies and myths that you and other feminists espouse about men and women. Large sections of the manifesto were reproduced without criticism in national articles, a prominence certainly not afforded to other similarly sized political outfits. So, Laura, Large sections of the manifesto were reproduced without criticism in national articles. Really? I can't recall even small sections being reproduced in national articles, let alone large ones. Here we see another part of the problem becoming clear. MRAs capitalize on the media's thirst for controversy. Bullshit, Laura. The idea that MRAs capitalize on the media's thirst for controversy is patently absurd, given that MRAs get almost no media coverage, decade after decade, while feminists, including yourself, get huge coverage. Media organizations employ legions of feminists, often as journalists or columnists or presenters or senior executives, while they don't employ known feminists. On to page 203. This is from a chapter titled Men Who Exploit Other Men. If men like J4MB's Mike Buchanan and other manosphere heroes acknowledged that the real issue at the root of so many of the problems they rail against is the stringent societal stereotype of masculinity, they would be stuck. There would be a risk that their adoring followers might be liberated, able to constructively tackle the issues that have left them silenced, or reach out for genuine support. Worse still, these forum idols and false prophets might actually be forced to do some work on dismantling gender stereotypes. Instead, they double down on the very problems hurting their followers the most. They encourage men to hold ever more tightly to outdated tropes of masculinity, suggesting that adherence to these tired and rigid constructs is a life raft, when it is actually the very current dragging many men beneath the surface. Laura, that passage displays such ignorance of the nature of men's lives and boys' lives that I'm disinclined to engage with it. It's so stupid. On to page 206. It is also ironic, given the extent to which manosphere leaders are prepared to hack, steal, and expose confidential information relating to feminists' families and private lives, that many are so coy about the realities of their own pasts. Men like Elam and Buchanan seek to present their antipathy towards the court system and the abject wickedness of women as a noble battle with pure ideological motives. So it is strange that they remain surprisingly silent about their own multiple divorces, or respond with fury when media reports mention strained relationships with ex-wives and biological children. Laura, I have never done any of the hacking, stealing, and exposing that you refer to, and I never would. As for the references to men like Elam and Buchanan, what on earth does that even mean, Laura? I am not aware of any media reports of strained relationships with ex-wives and biological children. I have no contact with my ex-wives, and my relationships with my two 30-something daughters are very good. On to page 220. In some countries where far-right and populist parties have won seats, entered into government coalitions, or taken political control, it is clear to see how the ideology of the online extreme right and manosphere communities might have an offline impact on citizens. In Spain, for example, far-right party Vox entered into a right-wing coalition in Andalusia, giving real political power to a group that called for the repeal of domestic violence laws and attacked psychopathic feminists. Even if unelected, the veneer of respectability granted by the platform of a registered political party, no matter how small, can provide an entry point for extremist ideas into mainstream discourse, as Buchanan's repeated appearances across popular news outlets demonstrate. Nobody with an IQ higher than that of a drunken fruit fly would consider J4MB either a far-right or populist party, which may explain why you would. You accuse me of putting extremist ideas into mainstream discourse and having enjoyed repeated appearances across popular news outlets. The first is a lie, the second, wild exaggeration. On to page 289 and the last of the sections I'm going to read out in this video. In April 2019, Mike Buchanan published an article on AVFM in which he announced a new strategy for J4MB, engaging with university students and academics, particularly those studying or teaching subjects close to our mission, such as politics and history. Within months, he had booked a venue to speak at Cambridge University, then reaped mainstream press coverage when students protested. Laura, you may or may not be aware that the feminists at Cambridge University did all in their power to stop Elizabeth Hobson and I speaking. There were protesters and the police took no action against them, sadly. We gave them the name Cambridge University Noisy Twats Society. The acronym seemed appropriate. I'm not aware, though, that we reaped any mainstream press coverage after the students' protest. Perhaps you'd be good enough to point me to it. There were hit pieces before and after the event in Varsity, the online students' feminist website, but no coverage in the mainstream press after the event, so far as I know. You omit in your book to mention that Elizabeth was also a speaker that day, her talk title being The History of Feminism. You don't want to give any publicity to that talk, obviously, or indeed even to Elizabeth working for the party. Bright, articulate, well-informed, attractive young anti-feminist women like Elizabeth must be your worst nightmare. Well, Laura, that's my critique of your appalling book. I invite you to respond publicly to my criticisms of your book, ideally in the course of a video recorded one-to-one discussion with me on Zoom if you like. I'll email you a link to this video, but you may have blocked my email address after our meeting back in 2013, so I would ask everyone who watches this video to send a polite email to you with a link to the video. That's laura@everydaysexism.com. I shall finish with a short message to viewers of this video. Remember, laughing at feminists isn't just important, it's a civic duty. Be sure to do your duty every time you encounter feminists, whether online or offline. Bye for now.